I'm Steve Bosque, the opinion editor of the South Florida Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale, and this is the candidate interview for the candidates for Attorney General of Florida. And with us is the Democratic nominee, Aramis Ayala from Orlando. We invited Attorney General Ashley Moody, the incumbent, who's going to be on the November 8th ballot as well, and we did not receive any response to our request that she also participate. Such an important office, so many issues that matter greatly to all Floridians. But we'll proceed with Ms. Ayala for sure. And I'm just want to introduce my colleagues. Chris Fluker is the opinion editor of the Orlando Sentinel, and her colleague Jay Reddick as well. So, Ms. Ayala, thanks. Welcome back. And we wanted to start by, asking you to sort of make a brief opening statement about why you're the best candidate in this race, and really what are the issues that voters in Florida should make their judgment and decision in this race based on. Thanks.
Right. Well, thank you. Again, my name is Aramis Ayala. I am the Democratic nominee for Attorney General. And, what makes me the best candidate to serve the people of the state of Florida as the next Attorney General is, an example is right now, like I show up. The job requires the attorney to show up. It's no different than, if you are have a hearing in court, if you have you're under subpoena. Our system of law and justice requires us to show up. Whether you are required to show up or whether it is just in the best interest of the people, you show up to expose who you are. You show up to lead. You show up as best you possibly can, and you bring the authenticity of the position to educate people on the power of the position, the responsibility and the duties. So the first thing is that I show up, and that's what we have to be able to do. The second thing is that I understand the job. Unfortunately, our current Attorney General has a fundamental misunderstanding, lack of understanding of the job. The job is to be an advocate for the people. The job is to be the voice of the people, to defend the interests of the public. And that's certainly one of the things that, I think is highly important, and that can go into several different areas from public safety. Certainly what we're dealing with now, insurance. But the bottom line is, if you want to be the Attorney General, you want people to trust you, you've got to show up and you have to understand the job. All
right. Thank you. I have one question, and then I'm going to pass the baton to my colleagues for questions as well. But Ms. Ayala, my question is, and it's been a recurring theme on the opinion pages of our newspapers and others, and that is, I want to hear you specifically tell us and tell voters, how has Ashley Moody politicized this office?
So let's start with, the beginning. And when you saw the election in 2018, the voters, the people, across the country voted for President Biden, and her engaging in this desire to overturn an election is political. It wasn't speaking for the voice of the people. It wasn't speaking for the voice of, the state of Florida, and it used her position to impact the election. That's our starting point. The other thing is that when we started these culture wars in this past legislative session, she engaged in the culture wars instead of being a voice for the people to push back on all of the politicization of the redrawing of the congressional district. She should have pushed back on the attacks on our educators. She should have pushed back on the attack on women's rights. That is the job of the Attorney General. But when you have a person who is sitting as the governor, who desires to be the president of the United States, and she is turning a blind eye to the people who just want to survive in the state of Florida and meeting all of his needs and standing by his personal attorney, that's politics, not support of the people.
I think we should return to the subject of Hurricane Ian a little bit later on, because after every time we get a serious hurricane in the state, as we all know, as if the horror and the destruction wasn't enough, we all know the scammers show up. The scammers show up offering people a free roof or a cheap roof. And it is the fervent responsibility of the chief legal officer of the state, the Attorney General, to protect people from scam artists. So, but that's an issue I think we can return to in a few minutes. So I'm going to defer to my colleague Chris Fluker and to Jay Reddick for questions.
Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity. I wanted to start off by talking about, as I'm sure you have followed, the governor's decision to suspend Hillsborough-based State Attorney Andrew Warren. If you had been Attorney General at the time, how would you have responded? And what is the AG's role, especially if you believe if as AG you believe that the governor was acting on legally insufficient grounds?
So number one, if I were the Attorney General, I would have spoke up immediately that it is inconsistent with our constitutional, number one, it was a violation of the First Amendment. Andrew Warren has a right to speak out and his right to free speech. He did not mention a case. There was not a specific case that he said he would not prosecute. He spoke about his feelings and protecting women's right to choose, which is extremely important. Number two, it was a violation of our voting rights. The people of Hillsborough County not only elected Andrew Warren, but they re-elected him. By far, that's who they wanted to determine what criminal justice, what the pursuit of justice and public safety look like in their community. As a result of that, when you think that it is important as the governor to substitute your opinion for an elected official because you disagree, that is a concern. So as the Attorney General, those are constitutional rights that have been violated. In addition, we're talking about another right in our Constitution, which is the right to privacy. He was speaking about his need to protect the right to privacy of those in his community and ended up being suspended because a governor had a different ideal of what justice should look like. So as the Attorney General, I would have not sided with him. I would have supported the Hillsborough County Attorney, Andrew Warren, and any litigation would not have been supported using the resources of the state of Florida to support, again, more wars on people that have nothing to do with the will of the people, but just the desire of the governor.
Thank you. And I wanted to switch gears as well to follow up on responding to some of the things that the governor has chosen to do. What response would you have had as Attorney General to the decision to use state funding to pick up legal asylum seekers in Texas and fly them to Martha's Vineyard?
Okay, I don't know how you answer that in 1 minute or less or 2 minutes, because there are multiple violations. Let's start with the taxpayers. Right now we're dealing, and I know you said we'll get to it, we're dealing with a major disaster here where the funding for the state of Florida should be spent on protecting us, not entering someone else's jurisdiction and carrying someone else, individuals to another jurisdiction. But people continue to say they use the word, removing, and they try to make it pretty. As a state attorney who prosecuted human trafficking, who fought against human trafficking, we have to call it by its name. What he did was engage in human trafficking, which is not just a violation of our civil laws. It was a violation of our criminal laws. And as the Attorney General, if we're going to talk about public safety, we have to be consistent in our language so that there's not a us versus them. If human trafficking is a problem and you want to say that you stand against it, then make certain that you stand against it when the governor engages as well. So I would have called it as it needed to be. I would have requested there be an investigation outside with the federal government in the governor's actions, both for the tax violations, the civil violations, all of the legislative violations, including criminal. This is a tragedy, what happened to human beings. And if you want to stand against immigration, so be it. That's your desire. But to engage in criminal activity and use state resources is above and beyond what should be happening.
Ms. Ayala, as Orange Osceola State Attorney, you, and if I'm mischaracterizing this, please clarify it, you oppose the imposition of the death penalty. As Attorney General of Florida, I believe the Attorney General has a statutory responsibility to represent the state in all death penalty appeals. If you're elected Attorney General on November 8th, what will be your approach and your philosophy and your office's function in terms of upholding a death warrant in a capital case?
Thank you for the question. I think I want to start off answering this question by number one, I have and will always follow the law. Any suggestion and wording that I have not followed the law, I would add a person to identify the statute or the case law that has been violated as a result of that. Law has been created as a result of that by the Supreme Court of Florida, but there has not been a law that was violated. Now, moving forward is going to be based upon all of the research and studies. As state attorney, and as the Attorney General, I did and will take an oath to pursue justice. I will also take an oath to pursue the law. The law requires me to consider the death penalty, and I absolutely will. The law also requires me to pursue justice. And justice requires us to look at all of the realities of the imposition of the death penalty, which looks at state resources. If we're spending $51 million in the state of Florida every single year, and that is above a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, we have to make sure that that is the wisest use of our resources. If we are going to do it, we have to get it right. Even knowing that we lead the state in death row exonerations, we certainly need to have a statewide conviction integrity unit that deals specifically with death penalty cases as well. And finally, we have to make certain that we are deterring people as a result of it and not just engaging in vengeance. The pursuit of justice will not change because of my opposition of death penalty. We have to ensure that the law is being followed, which I have done and will do. We also have to ensure that the policies allow us to pursue justice in a way that is beneficial to the people of the state of Florida.
Okay, and I have a quick follow-up on the same topic. We've come through. We are still in one of the longest periods in this state's history since the death penalty was reinstituted, where we have not had an execution. Now, there was the COVID-19 pandemic, which seriously disrupted the operations of the court system. We all know that. But I think it's also fair to say that operations in most of the trial courts have returned to a semblance of normalcy. Do you have any comment or perspective on the inordinately long period of time since we've had a death warrant?
Well, it's really interesting that we, have a problem with someone who's stating, as in myself, who's stating the facts of the death penalty. But then the reality is we're just talking it, in which if we're just going to talk about it and use the funds to support it, then we're not being who we say we are. And those inconsistencies don't represent justice. When I talk about defining justice, I talk about the level of inconsistency in the process and also hopefully the outcome. So the fact that we have not had a death warrant shows us who we are. We want to talk a big game. We want to say that this is what we do. But the reality is we are just spending money unnecessarily on a broken policy that we are not prepared to pay the consequences for realizing that it is broken.
Okay, yes. And please, if you would, tell me where the number comes from. You specifically mentioned the number of $51 million a year. Where does that come from?
Yes, I do know that the Florida Bar did an investigation as it relates to the death penalty, and they have produced it again. I think I did send it to you all during the primary. I can resend that as well, where that is from. And let me just jot that down so that I don't forget to do that. As soon as we disconnect, I will get that to you.
Right. I would like to see that, and I'm speaking only for my newspaper here as the opinion editor of the Sun Sentinel. Whether you oppose the death penalty or not on moral or religious or grounds of justice, if you're going to have a death penalty, it's the law of this state. We've not gotten a legitimate answer why it is not being utilized, and that's what we're discussing here right now.
And that's the concern, if I just may take 30 seconds, that
sure.
You have you want to push back on my position on the death penalty, but your action is being completely inconsistent with what you're saying you stand for.
Understood. I want to open the floor to Jay or to Chris at this time. Sure.
I had a quick question. It's a little more general, but I know that the governor and different members of the cabinet have overstepped their bounds, some might say, in the powers of their office. I wonder, as Attorney General, and you've been very careful, I think, during this to say I would do this or I would advocate for this. As Attorney General, do you know that there are powers or a line that you would not cross that frustrate you in terms of things that you wish you could do as an AG but can't?
Well, I mean, other than protecting the people and knowing that it's not just a goal from, governor's overreach, That's pretty much it. The job of the Attorney General is to protect the people, and I believe you do that at all cost. So if there are, limits on my ability to protect the people, then there's limits on me to doing my job and the people getting the service and protections and advocacy that they need. So the truth is, there is nothing that I believe that should, prohibit or hinder an attorney general from doing her job, short of following the law and short of truly representing the people of the state of Florida.
A really quick follow-up. As state attorney, were there any walls that you felt like you ran into in that same sort of situation?
Absolutely. I think that when you're using resources to prosecute cannabis, and resources that that there is a revolving door, we can't continue to do the same thing and expect a different result, or our criminal justice system truly is insane. So I think when you're looking at low-level crimes that some people are making money off of while others are being incarcerated, that doesn't represent justice. So yes, I would say low-level crimes such as prostitution, low-level crimes such as possession of cannabis aren't something that we turn a blind eye to, but we do need to manage it and balance it with what justice looks like.
I wanted to touch on something really quickly that is that has been something that AG Moody has pursued. The state is participating in several class action lawsuits, including multiple cases around the overzealous prescription of opioids, and some consumer actions, including one that is wrapping up against car manufacturers. Do you see any opportunities Florida is missing in regard to class action lawsuits that it could be pursuing on behalf of its citizens?
Well, I think that it's important to recognize that any class action lawsuit should be using the resources of the state and not, funding the friends and lawyers and all of the firms that are being multiple attorneys in the office are well capable of handling the legal ideas. I think that whenever we are handling class action lawsuits, then we should identify and have a system by which we add law firms that aid us in the process of that litigation. But certainly continuing on with the opioid, I think that, we know the history of the tobacco. These are the things that we have to be able to do that are impacting. I think that the insurance companies, is something that we have to specifically look at. Class action lawsuits, the ones who are going bankrupt, after collecting the premiums from Floridians and then leaving us right before such as this particular hurricane. So looking at the insurance, individuals who come in and harm us economically, who have increased the housing rates. When Wall Street comes into the state of Florida, we're buying it. So yes, I think insurance companies, as well as continuing the opioid, looking at the tobacco and all the things that we've had success with, absolutely we continue with that. But if we do it, and when we do it, we must utilize the resources of the state and not have a quid pro quo supporting law firms that just support, the Attorney General's election and reelection.
Thank you. And then I wanted to move quickly on to, because we are running short on our time here, to the AG's role as a member of the state cabinet. One of the important roles that the cabinet plays is the state's Land and Water Adjudicatory Commission, which hears appeals to local growth management decisions. What guidelines should cabinet officials use when they're looking at decisions that local officials have made, and how much deference are those local decisions due?
I think that this is where you get into the conversation about hearing from the local jurisdictions. At the state level, we have to be limited, and quite frankly, we don't use the word enough. We have to be humble enough to know that our knowledge at the local level must be informed by local leaders. If the people of those localities thought that these commissioners, and the mayor and these who are in charge should be running it, we have to listen to them and not fight against them. The issue is whether or not not they are representing the voice of the people. So the difference in the guidelines have to be consistent with hearing that this is the will of the people, but also respecting the insight and the information of the local leaders. So if they know that, for example, people don't want certain standards when it comes to water because it's inconvenient, versus the people who are on the commission understand that the science behind it is informing our decision, then we support the science of it. If it is supporting a quid pro quo, if it's supporting, financial kickbacks, and we're able to expose that and it's inconsistent with the will of the people, we're again going to go with science and the will of the people. It is about making sure that our local officials truly are speaking the voice of the people if it's going to elevate to the state level, so that our voice at the state level also reflects the voice of the our local citizenry.
Okay, and one more cabinet question. The cabinet also serves as the State Board of Administration, and I'm sure you're aware of the governor's announcement that Florida would ban investments in funds that operate under so-called environmental, social, and governance policies as part of their evaluation process. As a member of the Board of Administration, what action, if any, would you take in response to that?
I think it is important to remember that the cabinet was created, made up of the Attorney General, the CFO, as well as the Commission of Agriculture, to decentralize the power of the governor, which means that if we're going to continue up this road of just supporting the will and the wishes of the governor, when it is destroying the work of the people, when it's destroying the will of the people, and certainly impacting our economy in negative ways, it is my job, my duty, and my responsibility to stand up and speak out against those inconsistencies. So as the member of the State Board of Administration, I would always support what helps the state economically and not necessarily what is supporting the governor's wishes politically. We cannot politicize the economy. We have to ensure that Florida, being able to flourish, has the right people making the right decisions that aren't angry, that aren't based upon our social wishes, but that is ensuring whether it's the retirement and investing those retirement issues, those all have to be based upon the truth of how we get information and data. I think too often as leaders, we become so arrogant and think that because we are at the top of the ballot, or because we are at the top of the chain leadership wise, that we don't have to listen to people who are advising us. We need economic advisors. We need environmental advisors. We need legal advisors. These are the things that have to happen in order for us to be an effective board.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I've got one other question for you, Ms. Ayala, that kind of relates to what the points that Chris Fluker was asking about. And this is the vital importance of the Attorney General as a member of a collegial body, the cabinet, which it's often misconstrued, including by some of our colleagues in the media. It is not Governor DeSantis and his cabinet. That pronoun should be excised. The cabinet members are independently elected by the voters, and there are 3 of them. And when the system is working properly, those cabinet members are an independent check and balance on executive level power and the power of the other 2 branches as well. My particular question, Ms. Ayala, relates to the fact that the cabinet performs a critical role as the board of executive clemency in deciding hundreds of cases a year on restoration of civil rights, firearm authority, lots of things. But we know from the record that the cabinet has met less and less and less under this administration. The backlog of clemency petitions is growing. It's well into the tens of thousands at this point, probably, even with Amendment 4. And so my question would be to you, what sorts of changes and reforms would you advocate for the clemency process?
So I think that number one, I completely agree. The Clemency Board is one of the most important things because we are restoring rights and, giving people access to engage civically again, as well as, getting their Second Amendment possibly, depending on how that works. Now, I think that as part of the Clemency Board, we have to work very closely with the Office of Executive Clemency and possibly increase the resources and individuals who work there. And until we are expanding the number of eyes that are looking at these applications for executive clemency, we're not going to be able to increase how much we're producing and processing. I think we have to have implement automatic, where we reverse it instead of saying who should get their rights restored. All of these have hit a bottom line, and as long as that is hit, we allow those to pass through with exceptions. So we reverse the way that we review them, that they all go through except, and not they don't go through unless. The way that we approach it has to change. The individuals, the amount of resources that we put has to change, and we have to be able to expedite it with review being limited but automatic in certain instances.
All right, very good. We've been at this a half hour. I really appreciate your participation today. I think we are going to give you 1 to 2 minutes to make a closing statement, and emphasize the points that voters, as we do this interview today, there's no doubt vote by mail ballots are arriving in home mailboxes everywhere in the state, with an unbelievably special challenge, of course, in Southwest Florida in this election. So, Ms. Ayala, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for this opportunity to show up and to let the vision of my campaign be clear to the people who will decide this election on November 8th. Again, my name is Aramis Ayala. I am the Democratic nominee for Attorney General for the state of Florida. I am running because we need an Attorney General who understands the job, who understands that she is not here to lift the political image of a governor. She is not here to co-sign and turn a blind eye to the actions of a governor, but to be an independent voice, a member of the cabinet, an advocate for the people, a defender of the public. That is the job of the Attorney General. We cannot have someone who doesn't understand her job is to protect our constitutional rights and freedoms. Our right to privacy as women has been under attack like never before, attempting to literally take it and remove it from our Constitution and say that it has been interpreted wrong for all of these years. That's not the job of the Attorney General, because that is not the agenda of the people. The people desire our constitutional rights to be preserved, to be protected, and not to get access to drop them and to destroy them by the Attorney General. That's not what an advocate does. We need teachers who are able to educate and not indoctrinate. We need people who understand in that position that our job is to support the people, ensure that we have voters engaging, not oppressed and not wanting to vote and afraid to vote. We have to have a voice that represents the people who will show up every day with the full vision and heart for justice, with the full understanding of the job. And that's exactly what I will do as the next Attorney General. I am prepared for this job. I have been preparing myself for this job to understand, to show the people what justice looks like, to show the people a different level of public safety, because public safety is not just mass incarceration. It is also avoiding, with what our current Attorney General is doing, is harboring the person who literally is the biggest national security threat, Donald Trump. That's not what we can have. We can't have someone doing favors for people who are committing crimes, including our current governor with human trafficking. We have to someone be committed to having an Attorney General who's committed to one system of justice, and that is me. I thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to your support and your vote on November 8th.
Okay. Aramis Ayala, thanks so much for being with us here today. Aramis Ayala is the Democratic nominee for Florida Attorney General on the November 8th general election ballot. Thanks to my colleagues at the Orlando Sentinel, and best of luck to you. So long.